Great. Looks like it's going.
Here we go.
Awesome. All righty. Even with clear directions, I struggle to get things rolling. All righty. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in tonight. Welcome to the Culture Project sessions, Called to Love, Called to Hope. We're streaming live every weekday at noon and 7 p.m. Eastern here on Facebook. I'm glad that you have checked in and you're with us this evening. My name is Lindsay. I'm a part of the Culture Project team in Philadelphia, and tonight I am so excited to be joined by a good friend of the Culture Project. So every Wednesday we have particular formators of the Culture Project here to share a little bit about their background and their work and the formation that we receive as missionaries to go out and to share with the world the beautiful truths of human dignity and sexual integrity. So tonight, we have an incredible guest with me who I think will be able to shed a lot of light and wisdom on the times that we are currently in right now. So I'm going to really quickly introduce Dr. Greg Bottaro. So Dr. Bottaro founded the Catholic Psych Institute in 2012. Before becoming a psychologist, Dr. Bottaro was a Franciscan friar in temporary vows with the Friars of the Renewal, or CFRs, in New York City with Father Benedict Rochelle. During those formative years, he learned how to discern God's will and help others find happiness. 6 years after leaving New York City as a friar, Dr. Bottaro returned as a psychologist with the same mission to serve those in need. He's also an author, so he's written The Mindful Catholic, Finding God One Moment at a Time, Sitting Like a Saint, Catholic Mindfulness for Kids, and co-authored The Consecration to Jesus through St Joseph. Dr. Greg, thanks so much for being with me tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to be here with you guys.
Awesome. First of all, how are you doing and how's your family doing right now with everything happening?
We're doing pretty good. Yeah, we're hanging in there. It's we do a lot of stuff from home anyways. We're homeschooling. I work from home. So it's been minor practical shifts for us, nothing really huge. A lot of activities canceled, things like that. So even homeschooling families, I think people don't realize that there actually is like a lot of community activity that does take place. So this is a shift for everybody, even homeschoolers. But at the same time, we're just really enjoying the extra family time and trying to hang in there.
Awesome. Is there any new things that you're doing as a family in this time? Or like you said, there isn't much transition or shift, just keeping up with old routines?
Yeah, it's a good question. We're I guess I would say like just more intentional and more of the same thing that we know to do that we've been doing. But like now there's just like a little bit more focus on it. I think, it's something worth talking more about. It's just that we're all being given this opportunity to really evaluate our lives. And so like in my family, it's like, okay, here's all the things that I know I'm supposed to be doing. Like I literally wrote the book on it. So like, why am I not doing more of it? And if God is giving us this extra time to like really focus in on stuff, it's like, I should probably be doing more of that. So I'm taking that call and I'm taking that challenge. And I'm trying to meet God, where he's offering us.
Great. Yeah. And I'm so excited to dive a little bit into the books you've written and the work that you've done. Like I said before, every year, Dr. Greg comes to our training and forms our missionaries because I think you just do something that's so unique in terms of your psychology and the work that you do in your practice. You really combine what we know about the brain and what we know about the mind with also the church's teaching on the human person, kind of fleshed out for us by St. John Paul II and the theology of the body. So I'd love to hear a little bit, before we dive in here, just a little bit more about the unique approach you take in the field of psychology and how it's so integrated with the church's teachings.
Sure. Well, I think we have two problems happening that most people can relate to. On one hand, in the world of psychology, mental health, there's just like a ton of struggle with anxiety, with depression, with all sorts of mental health issues when it comes to addictions, when it comes to body image, identity, relationship to food, relationship to parents and siblings and friends and girlfriend and boyfriends, and just across the board, right? We have all this confusion, and it's almost an implicit joke that we struggle with stuff. And it's kind of like, well, that's just normal. And then on the other side, we have our faith, which is supposedly teaching us the way. And, you know, all of these people, you realize like it's the same people that are struggling with all the same stuff. And so if this is supposed to be, you know, the way towards happiness and holiness and the way of perfection, and Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and we're supposed to follow him, and this is all supposed to make sense, why do we have all this other stuff going on the other side where it's like we're still joking about how everybody's really struggling? So the way that I look at that is to say, well, there's something missing in both camps. In the world of mental health, we're missing any kind of real direction, any like a framework. And in the camp of the religious world and faith and spirituality, they're also missing something of like real human data, like what it means to be a human person. So we need to bring those two things together. And so that's what the Catholic Psych Institute does. We bring together psychology, the studies, the research, the understanding of mental health and all the disorders that we have. And we bring together the paradigm of like who the human person is through philosophy and theology through that Catholic lens. By bringing those two things together, we create this integrated view of the human person. And then we can say, okay, we're made for happiness. And so we should be able to get there. So if we put these things into practice, we actually can be happy. And like, this is something I put into practice in my own life, you know, in my own discernment of religious life. I was discerning the CFRs, and then I like hit this huge brick wall, and I was like, I need to figure out what's wrong. And it wasn't like I didn't have enough faith. Like I gave up everything, literally everything, to become a Franciscan friar.
Yeah.
So it wasn't spirituality that I was missing. It was integration. And so finally, with the help of Father Benedict Rochelle, some people might know who he was. He was one of the founders of the CFRs. He was a psychologist and helped me see how I had to like connect these dots and realize like my emotional life, the wounds that I suffered, the story of my life had to meet my spirituality. And through both together, could I actually discover the happiness God called me to? And so that's what he did in my life. And so I found the most amazing life, and I love life, and I couldn't be happier. I have an amazing wife. We have 5 kids under 7 right now. I have an awesome, you know, team therapists that have built up around me, and I love the work I do, and everything's amazing. Even in the middle of a pandemic, it's like our faith has to inform our emotional life. And if I know that, like one of my favorite quotes from Saint Therese, the world is thy ship and not thy home. If we know that this is just a ship, this is just the voyage, this is not our home. So if we plant our happiness on our destination and where we know we're going, bad stuff can happen. You know, anything can go wrong at any moment. But at the end of the day, that's not supposed to be the source of our happiness in the first place. So if you don't make it the source of your happiness, then it's not going to take away your happiness when it's gone. And that's how we can start to connect these dots and then bring our emotional life, our psychological life into that process and realize that we actually can be happy in this world.
Awesome. I've never heard a psychologist like speak that way with the integration of the two. I also want to point out 5 kids under 7.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome.
That is amazing, heroic, so cool. How old is the oldest and the youngest?
6, and the youngest is going to be 1 actually on Easter Sunday. He's going to be 1 next week.
That's so cool. 1 year old. Oh, so sweet. Great. Thank you so much for sharing that. That kind of reminds me a lot of what I hear sometimes with our missionaries speaking to young people. Maybe a young person, maybe in middle school or high school, will come to a missionary and kind of share with them that they're suffering with an addiction to pornography. We're exposed to it really young and are still trying to battle it. And people maybe of goodwill in church settings will tell them to just pray more or have a stronger prayer life, or, you know, to just kind of focus on that one aspect, and then your whole life will change. Can you kind of speak to how both are needed, like the mental healing, but also how important spiritual is to that too?
Yeah, no, I think that's really important to touch on, and it's a huge wound that people in the name of the church are inflicting, because it's not enough to just pray through some stuff. And Is prayer powerful? Is prayer everything? Yes, absolutely. But we have to remember that we're human beings praying.
Hmm.
So
Right.
we have to remember the humanity part of it, and we have to take that into account. And so, you're not going to sit there and not eat food and then just say prayer is going to sustain you and make you healthy. Like,
Right.
no, you still have to be human, even though prayer is everything. So
Hmm.
we bring those two things together and realize, is there a grace? Is there a spiritual dimension? Does our relationship with God matter? Yes, yes, yes. Does our virtue and our moral life matter? Absolutely. So we need prayer to sustain our moral life, but that's not every dimension of the human person. And if we deny the body, we deny the person.
Right.
And actually, if we deny the person, we're denying the incarnation.
Mm.
So it's actually anti-Christian. It's
Hmm.
actually anti-Christ to simply give the answer to pray more and it's going to fix everything. People don't really think about that, but the wounds that are inflicted because of that misunderstanding of our humanity are tremendous. And that's why the church loses credibility. So especially when people are trying to evangelize or go out and share the message of the gospel, like, let's share the real message of the gospel, not some fake watered down version of it.
Hmm.
And in the gospel, Jesus is human.
Yeah.
And he cries and he feels things and he gets angry and he's frustrated and he's tormented
Hmm.
and he's he needs to get away from it all and he tries to find some peace and quiet so that he could just pray. Like, these are all human movements
Hmm.
that if we don't appreciate and understand about Jesus, we're rejecting the actual incarnation, which means also the image that we're made in as human beings. So we
Hmm.
need to take all of that into consideration. If you're struggling with something, there's going to be an answer, but the answer is going to incorporate your biology, your psychology, and your spirituality,
Hmm.
not just one of those parts.
Hmm. Hmm. What kind of advice would you give to someone during this time who is feeling isolated? Maybe they don't have roommates or don't have a family and they're living alone and are struggling with anxiety, depression, maybe even falling back into an addiction to pornography. How would you encourage them practically during this time to kind of reach both and come to like an integration and really get to the root of what might be happening?
Yeah, it's a great question. Actually, it's funny you say that. I was talking to somebody, I was on another interview with a guy who was, and he was actually sharing publicly on his show, like, his own struggle with pornography. And he was saying that since all the masses and everything and the sacraments got shut down, he said he's had incredible grace and strength
Hmm.
in not falling into the sin of pornography. And he said this is really illuminating how he took it for granted that he could just go to confession.
Hmm.
And what an amazing opportunity God is providing the world right now to be like, what are you really doing in the depths of your heart? Like, who are
Hmm.
you really?
Hmm.
And let's get serious. It's time to get serious. So, like, what do you think about the Eucharist? Do you appreciate it? What do you think about confession? What do you think about sin?
Hmm.
What's really going on? So the first important relationship to really be digging into is between us and God.
Hmm.
And I believe that God is giving everybody this beautiful gift of his love and this invitation to really go deep into our own conversions.
Hmm.
And I mean that across the board, myself included. That's why I started talking about like being convicted with family time and like what I'm doing with my family, because at the end of the day, we can build up these veneers, these facades, and we
Hmm.
think that we're doing what we're supposed to do, but like we're just really building out a story for ourselves. God has just taken
Hmm.
the rug and ripped it out from underneath every single one of us.
Yep.
It's like I hear these people debating about liturgy. It's like Latin mass is the only way to be reverent, and then people are like charismatic prayer is the only way to have the Holy Spirit, and
Hmm.
all this stuff. And people are like, this is right, Vatican II, blah blah blah. And like God all of a sudden is just like, oh really, really? How about no mass?
Hmm.
Now what?
Hmm.
Now what's important?
Hmm.
And like it's really making everybody just go like, okay. I teach these practices, these exercises of Catholic mindfulness,
Hmm.
which is how to really connect the dots between your worry, your emotional life, your anxiety, your depression, and then your faith.
Hmm.
And this is the thing, like Jesus tells us, Matthew 6:25, do not be anxious about the things of your life.
Hmm.
And we're like, okay, yep, I love Jesus. I read the gospel. I go to
Hmm.
mass every day. I'm
Right.
evangelizing the culture. I'm doing this. It's like, but I'm also like really nervous and worried about my job and about my income and about this relationship. And is it going to break up, or is this going to happen? Or what's going to happen? Like, hello, like what gospel are you promoting, and what Bible are you reading? Like, how about we connect the dots here? So does he really mean it? Are you supposed to actually feel at peace if you believe in Jesus? And the answer is yes. Yes. So this is what I teach with Catholic mindfulness. It's like how to understand the brain, the mind, and our spiritual life, put it all together so you can have peace. And people constantly are like, sounds wonderful, sounds beautiful. I just don't really have the time for the exercises you want me to do this for 10 minutes a day? Like, I don't have time for that. You know, I'm like, okay, it's like, whatever. But now God is like, oh, you have no time? How about if I take away every obligation? Right. Just clear your schedule for a minute, for like a month. What are you going to do with all that free time? Like, nobody can use the time excuse anymore. So this is the kind of thing that every one of us is being invited to go deeper into really evaluating what's in the depths of our hearts and this is a come to Jesus moment. So and that's the first relationship. And then to get practical again, to you talking about relationships, loneliness, like, yeah, sure. That makes sense because we're made for communion. And I've been telling people, I mean, I think what's happening now with technology is absolutely profound and beautiful and amazing. And the world needs to catch up. But the reality that technology is a manifestation of the creativity of man, which is a mirror of God's own creativity. So when we're being creative and we're inventing things and there's technological advancements and there's all this stuff, people are always like, oh, that's so terrible. Like, TikTok is actually hilarious and it's awesome. Okay, now, like everything, does it also have all sorts of temptation and all sorts of ways that it's being misused? Yeah, of course. But it's like all these innovations, all this progression, all this movement, we need to see also the echoes of God in these things. And so now people are connecting with each other through Zoom calls, through Facebook Live, through Facebook groups, through all this stuff. Like, we need each other. And if we're going to use the technology to like take that seriously, like I've been invited to more hangouts and happy hours in the last month on Zoom than I've been in real life in the last 2 years. Right. So like, this is like what we need to do. Like, we should be communing with each other. This is what we're made for. So I just say, at first the memes came out and they were like, introverts have been waiting for this their whole life. And, but like, okay, that's fine. But like, we all need to come out of our introversion, out of our shells, out of our isolation, and we need to be able to connect with each other. And that's what we're made for, and that's what we can do now. So if you find yourself in that isolation, and the thing is, the deeper that depression is for somebody, they might not make that first move. So I've been encouraging people, like, make a move for somebody else. So like, think about people that you haven't talked to in maybe 10 years. And it could be like an uncle twice removed that's in another state that you just haven't talked to in a long time. Be like, just reach out. Be like, haven't talked to you in a while. I wanted to check in. Like, we have an excuse to do that right now. So do it, whether it's friend, family, whatever. Neighbors. I've been talking to neighbors that I've never met before. Right. They're starting this this teddy bear scavenger or teddy bear hunt thing. Have you heard about this?
No, I haven't.
It's awesome. They're putting, like your house, you can put a teddy bear in your window. I mean, kids that are going for walks with their families, they're like out on like a scavenger hunt or teddy bear hunt or whatever they're calling it. So they're like looking for people putting teddy bears in their windows. Like, this is so beautiful. This is what humanity is made for. Right. Like, we need this kind of community. So I would say, like, any ways that you can, like, reach out and tap into those opportunities. That would be the best way to avoid that kind of loneliness.
Reaching out to someone. I love the practical tip that you gave some people who might be experiencing depression, anxiety, kind of can't get out of their own headspace, like challenging people to reach out and to initiate things. I think that that's something very practical that we can do. Last week I was FaceTiming a really good friend of mine. She grew up as my neighbor and we met when we were like 10 years old. And we just kept adding people into the FaceTime. You can do that. You can add more and more people. And so I added my mom and she added her mom, and our moms were talking. They hadn't talked in like 15, 20 years since we moved out of our childhood neighborhood. And then we added my brother, who added his best friend in from the neighborhood. And it was this like, we went back almost in time, like 15 years. It was the coolest thing. I got off the call and I was like, I would have never done that if I had a full
Yeah.
schedule today and I had like my normal routine. It was just the coolest thing just to think about those people and make something happen. Everybody's home. Everybody probably doesn't have plans. So awesome. Thank you for just like the practicals there.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, Dr. Greg, you talk a little bit to us missionaries about the feminine genius and the masculine genius. And I will say our missionaries always like are buzzing after those sessions. For some reason, because of your background in psychology and the difference between the male brain and the female brain, like you just give us so much concrete substance in that. And I know we don't have a very long call, but I would love if you could just maybe reflect about how men and how women approach like a crisis or a pandemic or something like this, how a man might approach a crisis and how a woman might. I would love to hear your thoughts and your reflection on that. I know it's kind of a big topic, but
yeah, no, it's a big topic, but just to kind of brush the surface, I think, what I talk about is how the male brain and the female brain are very different in a lot of ways. And we know from theology of the body, we know from our philosophy, we know that the body makes visible the invisible. Mm-hmm. So if we want to see something about the human person, we look at the body. And when we see the body, we're seeing something about the person. So we see a male brain, and we know that that's part of what makes a man a man. There's masculinity, which is connected to the male brain. So I'm actually giving a talk on this weekend. In fact, if you don't mind posting a link, there would be it's a huge men's and women's conference.
Oh, yes, I've heard of this.
It's a virtual Catholic men's conference, and there's a virtual Catholic women's conference.
Great. I did see this.
Yeah, so there's my talk is going to be on it's for the men, and it's the neuro-spiritual dimensions of the masculine genius in crisis.
Oh, wow.
So it's basically going to be an answer to your question, but
awesome.
in more than 3-minute overview. But
all of our men, I'm going to tell them to call in for it.
Yeah, no, this is what it is. So it's the neuro-spiritual dimension. It's like there's neurological, there's spiritual, they're united. This is the integrated person. The body makes visible the invisible. So if we look at the brain, we're going to, like, people talk about feminine genius and like, well, I think it's this and I think it's this. And, JP2 had like a couple of things he said about it. He said nothing about masculine genius, but all of a sudden we have like volumes of books written on both. And it's like, okay, well, based on what? Like, why are you saying that? Mm-hmm. So my take on it is like, let's look at the thing we know is objective. Mm-hmm. And we can all agree that the brain is different and it has these dimensions to it. And let's start there and then see what that shows us about the person. And that's how we can stay safe in this conversation and not make assumptions about things that we're crossing over. Mm-hmm. So that's step one. And then the second step is to say an outward behavior might be the same for a man and a woman. But the difference is in the reasoning and the justification and the background and the framework and the experience of that behavior. So in this time of crisis, one thing I've noticed is that we have tremendous courage, people that are going, into the line of fire. I have patients who are doctors and nurses on the front lines, and they're like drowning in the situation in some of these hot spots, and men and women. So we have courage as a virtue of expressing this desire to die to self and put oneself out there for another person. And so, but we do see that there's a difference in the men's brain and the women's brain in terms of like what's building up to that action. So whenever we talk about the differences, it's important to say, like, if I'm talking about a man's courage, it's not to say that women aren't courageous. It's just to say for a man, like, there's some differences. Men have more testosterone. Testosterone stops us from thinking through to all of the consequences of our actions. Okay, so like and it also helps us, we also have compartmentalized brains. We also think much more abstractly. So like for all these reasons, if we're like going into the line of fire, like we might be more mission driven and we might be doing it without thinking about what's going to happen afterwards. And, those kinds of things might be at play. Whereas in the female brain, there's a lot more connectivity. There's a lot more relationality. So it might be a little bit more driven towards person instead of mission. So you might be doing the same thing, rushing to the front lines, but you're thinking about the people that you're saving.
Mm.
Whereas the man rushing into this might be thinking about like, this is my profession. This is the ideal of my vocation. This is the mission of our work here. Whereas the woman is like, I want to save these people. And like, I'm
Mm.
thinking about like, what if my kids were in that situation? What if it was my mom? What if it's that? So again, the outward manifestation might look the same, but there's going to be differences in the functioning. And then at the same time, we see that the opposite is also going to be true in terms of where courage might be on the surface. We might see, or the forefront, we might also see cowardice on the
Mm.
forefront.
Mm.
And so the reason I like to talk about this is if I'm talking to a man, I know that I can tap into his calling to be his masculine genius to come out and to talk about courage in those terms. Like, you're called to die for this mission,
Mm.
and you're called to, and you don't have to think about all of these consequences. Like, think more about what you're dying for, not the fact that you might die, and like,
Mm.
there's different kind of language that you can use that will move a man a lot
Mhm.
more efficiently.
Mhm.
Whereas same thing for a woman, there might be cowardice and there might be self-protection and there might be, but that's because we're not tapping into the feminine genius, which is like, well, think about the people.
Mm.
There's so many people suffering right now, and think about what it would be like to like receive the nourishment and that that aid. If you're the one that's suffering, like those people are suffering right now, like use some
Mhm.
empathy, use some sympathy, like you're like tapping into these personal dimensions. So and we could look at it, whether you're a physician on the front line, whether
Mhm.
you're a neighbor with an elderly neighbor who maybe you could go pick up some groceries and go venture into,
Mhm.
coronavirus territory of the grocery store with a mask and gloves and washing your hands, of course. Or if you're home alone, home alone, and you're on your computer and you're thinking about like pornography or a Zoom call with friends or reach out to somebody, like
Yeah.
that might take a tremendous amount of courage.
Mm.
And you can think about that differently if you're a man in that situation or if you're a woman in that situation. And you can tap into those brain structures that God gave you and amplify the ones that are going to help you be the best version of yourself in lieu of the ones that are actually bringing you towards vice.
Mm. That's great. I love that it's the motivation. I think that I can definitely see that in my life. And I don't know if people know about the Strengths Finder, but I'm just have higher relational strengths anyways. But the people motivate the action oftentimes for me. And I think that that's
Sure.
really important when you're in a family or you're living with roommates or you're working on a team. Our teams are out there still working and trying to live out this mission still. So how, if someone's in a situation where they're trying to call a member of the opposite sex into greater courage or kind of like wanting to call them out, how would you recommend through this kind of lens, like how to do that?
Yeah, I mean, think about that in terms of the person you're talking to. So this happens
Mm-hmm.
all the time, like a woman trying to call a man to greater courage, like let's say it's pornography, and like your go-to as a woman is going to be like, think about the people that are hurt, think about the fact that you're hurting me, think about this, like
Mm-hmm.
people. There's going to be a lot of person motivation, relational motivation. That's not
Right.
just a personality trait, it's actually a gender trait.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're going to, to think about it, like, well, I'm talking to a man right now, so like let me put this in men terms.
Mm-hmm.
And if I can figure out how to crack that masculine genius code, and it's like, this is the mission that you're called to. Like, this is how to die to self for the greater good.
Mm-hmm.
This is like, yes, you might feel these temptations, but you're called to die to those feelings and in this really sort of like testosterone driven, aggressive, like, I'm going to slaughter those lust feelings and I'm going to overcome them and be victorious
Mm-hmm.
for the sake of the mission.
Mm-hmm.
And like that kind of imagery, that's where like the soldier imagery comes in, like going into the breach and like all this kind of stuff becomes. Whereas if you're talking to a female,
Mm-hmm.
that's when you're going to accentuate, the human dimension, the relational dimension. And a lot of times there's like something missing on the relational dimension for both men and women, but that's going to be more effective
Mm-hmm.
to tap into that wound a little bit more superficially. That's like the first piece, like that's where you start.
Sure.
and then see if that might capture some attention and some motivation. And also,
Mm,
by the way, just to say for anybody that hasn't heard me talk about this stuff before, none of this is to say that these are black and white
sure.
criteria, like that men are not relational or that women are not mission driven.
Hmm.
We're built, this is like the big picture, the sort of like end of the story for my whole sort of thing here is that not only are we different, but we're different for a purpose. And the purpose is
Mm,
that we come together to learn from each other how to have some of the skill sets, some of the genius of the opposite sex. So men
yeah.
are supposed to grow in the feminine genius of their own masculinity, and women are supposed to grow in in the masculine genius of their own femininity. So that actually is supposed to start in childhood.
Mm,
So if a lot of times women hear me speak and they're like, well, I feel like I'm very mission driven. And sometimes I don't even think about the person. I'm like, well, you probably had a close relationship with your dad
mm,
because you've already received a lot of the masculine genius and it's formed part of your personality. Praise God.
mm-hmm.
That's awesome. But I still bet you that your brain is not firing the same way a man's brain is when it comes to mission talk.
Mm, mm-hmm.
And for the same thing for a man could be relational. He probably had a closer relationship with his mom, but his brain is not firing in the same way when it comes to relationship and empathy and connection as a woman's brain. When there's that experience of connection and communication and that the oxytocin's flaring and like all the stuff's happening, the
Mm-hmm.
man's brain's not going to look like the woman's brain.
Right.
So there might be that, again, outward behavior might be similar, but there's going to be totally different motivation and things happening on a neurological level. And you can use
Mm.
that knowledge to tap into those structures to help people actually move the needle in their life.
Mm. That's such an important clarification. Thank you for making that for maybe a man who's like, I don't know if this is like resonating, or I don't feel like I fit the stereotype maybe of like the masculine or this or that. So thank you for just making that, because I think it is true. Like the motivation, like courage can be seen in a man and a woman. Like that is beautiful and
Of
good, and
course.
any virtue
Yeah.
cultivated, man
Yeah.
and woman, but the motivation and the way that it's manifested in their concrete actions maybe a little bit different, or what's even happening in the brain. I don't think we hear about this like ever or often, like what is happening in a woman's brain, what's happening in a man's
Right.
brain. Such good truths. Where can people go to learn more about that, like the concrete, like what's happening in a man's brain and what's happening in a woman's brain, maybe from like development or childhood into
Yeah. So, one
adulthood?
thing I was thinking about too, just to kind of touch on here is, and people can go to catholicpsych.com
Mm-hmm.
slash store. We just built a new website. And so there's a resources page that's got a bunch of materials on there. And so I have my courses that I sell. I have a bunch of free resources. So one of the free resources is the Consecration of St Joseph that I wrote along with Jen Settle from the TOB Institute. And I talk about this a lot throughout that consecration. And the point that I was going to bring up is that if you realize that you don't have that formation of your masculinity or femininity with those two polar formative principles of your mom and your dad, like if you didn't have those close relationships that fill out your own personality, this is the beautiful gift of our baptism, is that we enter into the life of Jesus and we get his mom and his dad.
Mm-hmm.
And it's through the motherhood of Mary and the fatherhood of Joseph, because Joseph is the dad who formed Jesus' humanity, that we get our human formation healed and filled out and corrected and perfected through Mary and Joseph. So by using our imagination, which connects the dot between our spiritual life and our emotional, psychological lives, we can feel what it feels like to be loved by a mom perfectly. We can feel what it feels like to be loved by a dad perfectly. And for the man, Joseph is going to be that formation of their masculine genius. For the man, Mary's going to be that softening feminine genius dimension that's going to help fill out and flesh out the, and then same thing for the woman. Mary is important, Joseph is important. So this is a very practical thing. If you go through that consecration, you could do it anytime. We started it on March 19th and the consecration ends on May 1st. So people can still jump in and kind of read ahead. May 1st. So if people get there, catholicpsych.com/store, then there's the Consecration of St. Joseph, and that's a daily email. And then that will just give little videos and snippets about reflections, journal prompts, things like that, to go like deeper into our own inner world to make that connection and hopefully have that experience.
That's great. I have one more thought, a question coming off of that. Like we don't hear about St. Joseph very much in scripture. Obviously, we know he's part of the Holy Family, that he is the father of Jesus, but people so often are just so quick to go to Jesus, which is obviously like, he's our Lord, he's our Savior, but like, what is the benefit of consecration or going to St. Joseph in a way that people might think like, oh, you can go to Mary, you can go to Jesus, like the masculine, feminine, the man, the woman. What would be a benefit of going to St. Joseph?
Yeah, so obviously Jesus is God. So so he's the bridge.
Mm-hmm.
He's who we all have to go through to get to the Father.
Mm-hmm.
But to go to Jesus, and we have a lot of healing to do.
Mm.
And so we need our own human formation to be reparented and redeveloped and reformed.
Mm.
And again, because of integration, we're not just a spirit. If we were just a spirit, then connection to Jesus, to the Father, through his divinity would just kind of zap us, and then we would be like totally perfect.
Mm.
But we have this other dimension, which is developmental. It happened in space and time, which is part of our body. Our space and time is a bodily reality. Spirits are outside of space and time. God
Mm-hmm.
is outside of space and time. So like the body, this is like E equals MC squared, right? There's a lot of metaphysical dimensions to this whole thing. But the reality is that's our humanity that needs to be reformed.
Mm.
And so it's not a masculine feminine thing. It's a father mother thing.
Mm.
And we need to start from where we are, which is a human person. We need a human father, human mother to simply reparent us. And that's, if it's good enough for Jesus, it should be good enough for us.
Yeah.
So Jesus needed to be formed in his humanity by a mom and a dad. We need to be formed in our humanity by a mom and our dad. And then because it's through the baptism of Christ, we get his mom and dad, who are the perfect mom and dad, and they help restore our perfection and our humanity, which unites us to Jesus and his humanity, and then he can take us to the perfection of the Father and his divinity. But we need Joseph and Mary.
Wonderful. And such a gift that our faith tells us and teaches us that whatever relationship we have with our earthly mother, earthly father, regardless of if they were the perfect parents, they're still human and still flawed. But that we have a perfect mother and a near perfect father that we can go to and almost be healed in different ways from mother wounds and father wounds.
Right, exactly.
Beautiful. Dr. Greg, we covered so much. I want to thank you for your time. Is there any final words of encouragement to people watching? Any final thoughts that are coming to mind before we close?
Yeah, I really want to offer this and encourage people to really go deep. And I have tons of resources out there for free. Dropped the prices on basically everything else on my courses and everything else. But like, I think that God is giving us an opportunity to really go deep into understanding like what's keeping us from peace in this world.
Mm-hmm.
And we can see that from the economy to the healthcare system to our family life to everything. So like we built this curriculum for kids. If anybody in your audience has any, knows any kids or homeschooling situations where families need some extra help with a curriculum that's based on teaching Catholic mindfulness to the kids. The virtual retreat is a way for us to learn, that's those daily videos to learn how to connect the dots here. And so, and if anybody wants to reach out to me, if you just need free access to anything, basically like take the opportunity. Don't sell yourself short right now. I think that God is holding a megaphone to his mouth and blasting into the world. Wake up, wake up, wake up. I think this is a huge mindfulness exercise for the whole world to come to our senses, to wake up and to see what's really going on and to realize if we choose God, that has to have meaning for us. That's going to change everything.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much for just being such a great friend of the Culture Project, for forming our missionaries, and for being with me tonight. I really, really appreciate it. Thanks for joining me, Dr. Greg. So during this time, the mission of the Culture Project lives on. Consider making a donation today to thecultureproject.org/donate. We'll be back tomorrow at noon. You'll hear from a group of our missionaries who will be sharing how will dating look now. So tune into that at noon tomorrow. We'll be a group of 4 of them. Thanks everyone for tuning in tonight. It was a gift to be with you all, and God bless you. Bye. All right. Okay. Oh, I think we're still recording. Let me see.
It says still recording, yeah.
Let's see here. How do I stop recording? Oh, stop video. Stop recording. Okay, goodbye for real, everyone. Thanks.